Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep into the Science of Identity Foundation.
SIF.
Yes, SIF.
Yeah.
And specifically, their presence in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got articles, court documents, even some social media posts.
Real mix.
Yeah, a real mixed bag. And honestly, the more I looked at this stuff, the more questions I had.
Yeah. I can see why
It's complicated.
it gets complicated fast.
Yeah.
What's so interesting to me is how SIF operates globally,
Right.
often using different names for their centers.
Yeah. It's tough to track.
It makes it really hard to track their influence. And then, you layer on what happened in Poland with the tragic death of a child of Polish followers.
Right.
And then the suicide of Kasia Socha.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the impact of this group on its members, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, what was the experience of these Polish followers? The sources you sent mentioned this Polish branch called Iwatu Mitsuo Czaitanii.
Right.
That translates to Science of Identity Institute, Czaitania Mission.
I'm curious, does this structure, like, mirror SIF's setup elsewhere?
It really seems that way. Yeah, we've got info indicating that Iwatu Mitsuo Czaitanii function very much like other SIF centers around the world.
Okay.
They were teaching the philosophy of Chris Butler, who's the leader of SIF,
Right.
and promoting a certain lifestyle centered around his interpretations of Hinduism.
So who are the key players in this Polish branch? The names Tapasya Das and Balakilya Das keep coming up.
Those two were definitely central figures.
Yeah.
One document by Alan Tibby Acharya Das, who's connected to SIF, mentions that Polish followers were initially taught by David Muncy, also known as Tusta Krishna Das.
Okay.
After Muncy passed away, Balakilya kind of stepped in to teach and oversee things in Poland.
So it sounds like a very hierarchical structure.
Yeah.
You know, passing the leadership torch like that. It makes you wonder about the qualifications of these individuals.
Right, were they actually qualified to act as spiritual leaders?
Exactly. And there's another intriguing detail. There's this recording from mantra.pl where Balakilya Das says his spiritual life really began when he met his guru, Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa,
Oh, wow.
another name used by Chris Butler.
Of course.
But here's the thing. He leaves out the fact that he was originally initiated by Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCon.
So a bit of a...
Little rewriting of history.
Yeah, trying to position Butler as the sole source of spiritual authority.
Almost like erasing the past.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's one interpretation for sure. And it definitely raises some questions about transparency and motives.
For sure. Okay, so we've got this hierarchical structure, a potential attempt to rewrite history, and then you have these tragic events in Poland.
Great.
We keep coming back to the death of a child and Kasia Socha's suicide, but honestly, the details are pretty sparse. What did the sources actually tell us?
Yeah, you're right. The information on those specific events is very limited. We need to be extremely cautious here. We can't definitively link those tragedies to SIF's practices, but they happened within a context of what looks like controlling behavior and pressure on followers.
Right. There are claims that members of the Polish branch were sent abroad to work on SIF projects,
Yeah.
and they often had to sign these non-disclosure agreements,
Wow.
working for little or no money, sometimes even spending their life savings.
That's a recurring theme in the sources, this alleged exploitation of labor.
Yeah.
It raises major ethical concerns,
Wow.
with SIF prioritizing its own gain over the well-being of its members.
Right.
It certainly seems that way.
One social media post that really stuck with me was from Fabian Kurowski.
Okay.
He's a Polish blogger who seems to have done a lot of research on SIF.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote, I keep reminding myself that all Chris Butler devotees are victims who deserve a chance to discover their exploitation, and then, let's hope, do something better with their lives.
Wow, that's a pretty bleak outlook.
Yeah, it is. And it just underscores the potential for harm when an organization blurs the lines between spirituality business and potentially exploitation.
Yeah.
Speaking of blurring lines, we have to talk about Chris Butler, the leader of SIF.
Okay.
What kind of figure are we dealing with here?
From what we've gathered, Chris Butler is a complex character. He presents himself as this spiritual master, but there are these accusations of him exploiting his followers both financially and emotionally.
Wow.
There's even mention of secret tapes.
Hold on, secret tapes.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Apparently, former members allege that these tapes were full of offensive language and that they were played for children attending SIF schools.
If true, that's a very disturbing detail.
Yeah.
And then there's these business ventures connected to SIF.
Right.
One that keeps popping up is QNet.
Okay.
Can you explain what it is and how it relates to all of this?
Sure. QNet is a multi-level marketing company that's been accused of operating as a pyramid scheme, and there are claims that SIF may have used businesses like QNet for financial gain.
Okay, so we've got SIF, a supposedly spiritual organization,
Hmm.
intertwined with this controversial business model.
Right.
And we haven't even touched on the political connections yet. There are articles detailing the Gabbard family's political involvement in Hawaii and their ties to SIF.
Really?
Yeah. It seems Mike Gabbard, Carol Gabbard, and their daughter Tulsi Gabbard all held political positions and were followers of Chris Butler.
Huh. The Gabbards' political careers certainly raise questions about SIF's potential influence on their decisions and policies.
Yeah. It's a layer of this story that definitely deserves more attention.
Sure.
Absolutely. But before we get there, I want to zoom in on some specific details from the sources.
Okay.
One quote from a former member who attended SIF schools really stood out to me. They said, "We were taught to worship Butler and his wife Wailana as messengers of God."
Wow. That's quite a statement.
Right.
It speaks to the level of devotion expected from SIF members. It also raises concerns about potential manipulation and exploitation.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Another detail that jumped out at me was the description of Chris Butler's secret tapes.
Yeah.
Former members claim that these tapes were full of homophobic and derogatory content.
Hmm.
And they were played for children at SEF schools.
Hmm.
I can't even imagine the impact of that kind of exposure on young minds.
It's deeply disturbing. Those allegations, along with the financial irregularities and political entanglements, paint a pretty unsettling picture of SIF's operations.
All right, so we've got this overview of SIF and its activities,
Yeah.
but I think we need to really unpack what was happening specifically in Poland.
Yeah.
What were the experiences of those Polish followers like? And is there more to uncover about the death of the child and Kasia Socha's suicide?
Let's see what we can find. It's interesting to think about the context of Poland in the early 90s.
Okay.
You know, the country was transitioning from communism to democracy,
Right.
a period of just huge social and economic upheaval.
Yeah.
People were searching for something to hold on to a sense of meaning and stability
Mm-hmm.
in a world that felt like it was changing too fast.
So you're saying that SIF might have appealed to people who are feeling lost and uncertain about the future?
Yeah, like offering a sense of belonging, a community.
Right.
Precisely, SIF provided that, a community, a purpose, a path to enlightenment.
Okay.
They promised freedom from suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of message can be very powerful.
Right, especially for people struggling to adapt to a new reality.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if those who joined the Polish branch IWOS, Mr. Czaitanii, were seeking answers and a sense of direction during that turbulent time.
It's certainly possible. And that's something to keep in mind as we try to understand the experiences of these Polish followers.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about the leadership structure in Poland with Topasia Das and Balakilia Das,
Right.
but I'm still struggling to picture what daily life was like for those involved.
Yeah.
What kind of activities did they engage in?
Well, based on the sources, it seems that Iwati Mr. Czaitanii followed a similar pattern to other SIF centers. They emphasized Butler's teachings and encouraged a lifestyle centered around his interpretation of Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
There's mention of members distributing flyers, attending lectures, participating in group chanting sessions.
Okay, but we also know that some members were sent abroad to work on SIF projects.
Right.
What more can you tell us about that?
The sources suggest that these trips weren't always what they seemed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, members were often required to sign non-disclosure agreements
Wow.
and work for little to no pay. Some even ended up spending their life savings.
That's awful.
It's a pattern of potential exploitation that really stands out in the research you provided.
And those non-disclosure agreements, it makes you wonder what SIF was trying to hide.
Right.
Was it simply about protecting their business interests, or was there something darker at play?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely raises questions about transparency and control within the organization. Why the need for such secrecy if everything was above board?
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about those tragic events in Poland. The death of the child and the suicide of Kasia Socha.
Right.
We've touched on this before, but I think it's time to really delve deeper. What can we glean from the sources about these events?
You're right, these are crucial events that deserve more attention.
Hmm.
While the sources don't directly link these tragedies to specific actions by Sif, they occurred within a context of alleged controlling behavior and immense pressure on followers.
Right.
Remember those allegations about members working abroad for little or no pay, often spending their life savings?
Yeah.
Imagine the financial and emotional strain that would put on individuals and
It's
families.
heartbreaking to think about. And then there are those claims about Sif discouraging critical thinking and questioning of authority.
Exactly. If those allegations are true, it's possible that individuals within SIF felt they had nowhere to turn when faced with personal difficulties or doubts.
Wow.
They may have been isolated from their support networks outside of the organization and fearful of speaking out.
So while we can't definitively say Seth caused these tragedies, it's possible their practices created an environment where such events were more likely to occur.
That's a fair assessment, I think.
Right.
It's important to consider the potential impact of SIF's teachings and practices on the mental and emotional well-being of its members,
Right.
especially during a time of such societal upheaval in Poland.
All right, before we move on from Poland, I want to loop back to Chris Butler.
Okay.
We know he's the leader of SIF, but how much influence did he actually have on the Polish branch? Did he ever visit Poland or have direct contact with Polish followers?
The sources don't offer clear evidence of Butler visiting Poland, but his teachings were definitely central to the Polish branch's activities. Remember that recording from mantra.pl where Das claims his spiritual life truly began after meeting Butler?
Yeah.
That suggests a strong influence, even if it was indirect.
Right. And we've already talked about how Das downplayed his connection to the founder of ISKCon, seemingly to elevate Butler's status. That seems pretty significant, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It suggests a deliberate effort to position Butler as the ultimate spiritual authority within SIF, even potentially rewriting history to achieve that goal.
Okay, so Butler's presence even indirectly looms large. And we can't forget about those secret tapes. Did those recordings ever surface in Poland, or were they primarily circulating elsewhere?
The sources you've provided don't mention those tapes being specifically distributed in Poland, but it's possible they existed within the wider SIF network.
Right.
It's worth considering how those kinds of messages, even if not explicitly shared, might contribute to a culture of fear and control.
That makes sense. It's not just about what's explicitly said, but also about the unspoken rules and the climate of fear that can permeate an organization.
Exactly. And speaking of fear and control, let's revisit QNet.
Okay.
We know it's been accused of operating as a pyramid scheme.
Right.
But how did SIF members get involved with it in the first place?
Right. It seems like such a strange connection for a spiritual organization to have. Did SIF actively encourage its members to join QNet?
From what we can gather from the sources, it appears SIF framed QNet as a way for members to achieve financial independence and support the organization's mission.
So using spiritual language to promote a business venture. I'm starting to see how those lines between spirituality and business can get blurred.
Yeah, it's a tactic used by many groups, not just SIF. By wrapping a potentially questionable business model in a cloak of spirituality, it can become more appealing and even seem justifiable to those already committed to the organization's teachings.
It's almost like they're creating a self-contained world where the rules of the outside don't apply.
That's a great way to put it. And within that self-contained world, a leader like Chris Butler can exert a tremendous amount of influence over his followers' lives, including their finances.
Okay, so we've explored the structure of SIF in Poland, delved into the tragic events that occurred there, and looked at the potential influence of Chris Butler and the controversial QNet connection. But we still haven't talked about the Gabbard family and their political ties to SIF. That feels like a big piece of the puzzle.
You're right, the Gabbard family's involvement adds another layer of complexity to this story. It brings up questions about the interplay between spirituality, politics, and potential influence.
Let's dive into that. What did the sources tell us about the Gabbard's connection to SIF and how it might have impacted their political careers? Or the Gabbard family. We know they've been involved in Hawaiian politics for years, and the sources you sent suggest a deep connection to SIF. What can you tell us about their history with the organization?
Well, it seems that the Gabbard family's ties to SIF run deep. Mike Gabbard the father was a prominent figure in the organization. He even founded an anti-LGBTQ plus organization called Stop Promoting Homosexuality,
Oh, wow.
which aligned with some of SIF's more controversial stances.
So not just a personal connection, but also a potential overlap in ideology.
Exactly. And this connection to SIF has kind of followed the Gabbards throughout their political careers. Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, has faced a lot of scrutiny for her past statements and actions that seem to reflect SIF's teachings. You know, her stance on LGBTQ+ rights, her defense of certain authoritarian leaders, and her association with Hindu nationalist groups have all raised eyebrows.
It's starting to feel like we're peeling back layers of an onion here.
Yeah.
This isn't just about a spiritual group, it's potentially about influence reaching into the political sphere.
That's a key takeaway for sure. The Gabbard family story shows how those lines between spirituality and politics can become blurred, and how an organization like SEF can potentially exert influence in unexpected ways.
It makes you wonder about the potential impact on policy decisions.
Right.
And even the shaping of political discourse.
Absolutely. It raises important questions about transparency, accountability, and the potential for undue influence within the political system.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored SIF's global structure, their presence in Poland, the tragic events surrounding the death of a child, and Kasia Sosha's suicide, Chris Butler's leadership, the controversial QNet connection, and even the Gabbard family's political ties. What does it all mean? What's the takeaway for someone listening to this trying to make sense of it all?
I think the most important takeaway is the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to organizations that promise easy answers or spiritual enlightenment.
Mm.
SIF's story is a cautionary tale about the potential for abuse exploitation and the blurring of lines between spirituality, business, and politics.
Right, and it highlights the need to be aware of the tactics these groups might use.
Yes.
Like encouraging unquestioning obedience, isolating members from outside influences, and using manipulative language to justify harmful actions.
Exactly. Healthy skepticism is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's okay to ask questions, to challenge authority, and to seek out different perspectives.
And if something feels wrong, trust your gut. Don't be afraid to walk away or to seek help from trusted sources outside of the organization.
Right. There are resources available for people who have been affected by groups like SUF, and it's important to remember that you're not alone.
This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least.
It really has.
It's clear that there's a lot more to unpack when it comes to SIF and their global network.
Yeah, this is just the beginning. What we've uncovered here is a starting point,
Well,
foundation for further exploration and understanding.
so what stands out to you from all of this? What questions are you left with?
What strikes me most is the human element of this story.
Yeah.
The lives that have been impacted, the families that have been torn apart, the individuals who have suffered. That's what makes this research so important and so compelling.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that behind the complex structures and ideologies, there are real people whose lives have been deeply affected by SIF's activities.
We encourage you to continue exploring these issues, to ask questions, and to form your own conclusions. And as you do, remember to approach this information with empathy, critical thinking, and a commitment to seeking truth.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope it's been informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.